Hey guys, I can't be here on Friday, so I was told to give my presentation to you through YouTube. So here we go. I believe that Arnold Jackson from the TV show Different Strokes put the 70s in perspective when he said, "What you talking about, Willis?" And, that's not too relevant to us, but in a way it is because that was a pretty popular form of entertainment, the TV, such as The Same Today, and I interviewed my dad to discuss the 1970s, and you might think that it was a lot different, but really, that decade was a lot more similar to ours than a lot of people think. In my presentation, I will examine the similarities and differences in the pop culture trends of the 70s to today's trends through discussing and reflecting on my interview with my dad. Let's see. My dad participated in pretty fair amount of the major pop culture trends. He lived on a farm in a pretty small town in North Dakota, so he wasn't as involved or involved with the pop culture trends compared to the big cities and the atmosphere, but he still had a fair amount of access to pop culture trends. Even though TV was around for about 20 years in the 70s, it was still a pretty focal part of life that day in the family. My dad loved TV shows like The Brady Bunch and MASH and stuff like that. And another really big form of entertainment that's probably bigger than today is movies. He said that he loved going to see movies with his friends. They would hang out in the parking lot before and after, just kind of hanging out, having a good time, and then they would go and watch the movie. And movies do make more money and they're a lot popular, but there was not as much to do back then, so that was probably a bigger focal point, I think, than it is here today. The 8-track cassette tape was pretty popular because it was fairly new, and he said it was pretty cool because you could actually take the music that you wanted to listen to in the car with you instead of just having to settle for what the radio is playing. Um, Rock and roll was a really big part of the 70s, big concerts and stuff. My dad really never really got into the hard rock, not even hard rock, but just the rock and roll scene. He listened to the Rolling Stones a little bit and other bands like that, but he was more of a soft rock kind of guy. His hair was pretty similar to the rock and roll guys. He had that long floppy hair that we know and love from that day. He he got into the party scene obviously in college and high school and stuff, because parties were huge, pretty similar to what it was like back then. He didn't really get into the whole pot, drug, LSD crazy party scene. Um, yeah, he kind of stayed out of that for the most part. Um, yeah, some other things that are pretty similar to today were political scandals. Nixon, his Watergate was the big talk back then. He said that it was filling the news, and it's pretty similar to the scandals of today, mostly the sexual scandals and stuff of that nature. And also the Vietnam War was, he said, probably the biggest news of that time period, and you couldn't really go anywhere without seeing that. That's pretty similar. We have Afghanistan and Iraq war, and now Korea's threatening. So war is in the news a lot now, like it was back then. He said that concerts were huge. Concerts were huge back then. He did say that it's different now today a little bit because there are a lot more genres. You have hip hop and dance and folk and all that stuff, and you did have a little R&B and some other genres, but rock and roll was pretty much the main go-to concert venues. Sports were a lot of focus back then. A lot similar today. It's a big part of our culture, a big part of their culture. Baseball was probably a little more popular than football, which is a little different than today, but still that same sporting events being huge was pretty much the same thing. My dad said the dumbest thing that was in the 70s was the pet rock, how people would just carry it around and pay to just have a rock. He never really got involved in that. He said that he thought it was pretty stupid, and he's a pretty smart guy, so he didn't really want to do that. There wasn't as much to do back then, especially where he was from. So movies were huge. The fashion was obviously a lot different. but it's starting to get a little more similar as time goes on. But yeah, they had bell bottoms, long hair, polyester, those big bright colors, pretty big and bold in the 70s. And yeah, I mean, in conclusion, the 1970s was a time of parties and fun. Living on a farm, my dad wasn't really highly exposed to the major city atmosphere, but he still saw a lot of those same pop culture trends. The 1970s was a lot more similar today than some people might think. Concerts, parties, and music were big part of growing up back then, as is the same today. And as much as times change, the more they stay the same. So, thanks guys, appreciate it.